Well, good afternoon. Welcome along to Unbelievable with me, Justin Brierley. This Saturday afternoon, it's the time of the week when Christians and non-Christians get together to debate aspects of science, faith, belief, scripture, ethics, all sorts of areas. And it's part of your Saturday lineup of programming every Saturday, Faith Explored, where we look at the big issues around Christianity. And don't forget that later on we've got the profile interview where we interview leading Christians in world of science, faith, politics, arts, media, sport and so on. It's all to come this afternoon here on Premier Christian Radio. But today, a very exciting topic. Two very exciting speakers joining me as well. Let me introduce you to what's going on today.
You're unbelievable.
Well, on the back of a recently released DVD called The God Question, my guests today are atheist physicist Lawrence Krauss and Christian mathematician John Lennox. They'll be familiar to anyone who's at all involved in the Christian atheist debate scene. Lawrence Krauss joined me last week on the programme to talk about his interaction with William Lane Craig in Australia earlier in the summer. And John Lennox is no stranger to this programme either. He is, of course, a mathematician from Oxford. He's part of the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. He wears many hats. He's published many books. And, of course, he's been a speaker at past Unbelievable conferences as well. And the DVD that we're using as the basis for our discussion today is called The God Question. It's a product of Caris Productions. Ian Morris is the man behind it. And if you want to find out more, because we'll be playing out some clips from the DVD series today, do visit their website, thegodquestion.tv. Essentially, it's a DVD looking at the big questions in science and faith. The first DVD is on the cosmos, the second on life and evolution, and the third on mind and consciousness. And in a future programme, we will be covering the issues of mind and consciousness. But on today's programme, we're going to be looking at the cosmos and asking, does it leave space for God? And on the DVD, a number of people are interviewed, including John Lennox, but also a number of atheist scientists, people like Alexander Vilenkin. There's agnostics like Paul Davis. Peter Atkins is on there, Richard Dawkins, William Lane Craig, Michael Shermer, Christopher Hitchens even pops up. A variety of voices represented. So very much in keeping with the format of this programme, in which we aim to bring different voices together to discuss these important issues around science and belief. Again, if you want to get hold of it, it's already aired in some countries as a TV programme, but here in the UK, available on DVD. You can find more out at thegodquestion.tv. Well, let's introduce our guests on today's programme. Let's start, first of all, by welcoming to the programme John Lennox. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's great to have you back again. Just give us a little background, though, to what's been going on for you in the last year or so. You're a very busy man. Tell us about some of the things you've been up to and some of the speaking events that you've been part of.
Well, in the past year, I have been in the United States a few times and doing lectures at Ivy League universities like Yale and Brown and so on these big questions of science and God and ethics. And what I've discovered is an enormous interest. I've been surprised, and the organisers have been surprised, at the huge crowds who've come and the intelligence of the question. So God is very much in the agenda in the top universities in the world. And just recently I did the speech at the UK National Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast, and I found that quite an interesting experience. So all in all, it's been a very busy time.
You seem to be in demand more than ever at the moment, John, and you indeed were one of the contributors to the God Question DVD that we're using as the basis for our discussions today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got involved in that?
The fundamental idea, as you've explained, is the idea of your programme. Let's give a fair public hearing to both sides and let the people judge. And I felt it was a great opportunity to be on a DVD with people as diverse as Stephen Weinberg, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens on the one side, and then leading Christian thinkers on the other side. And I feel that this is the kind of thing that can open up the public debate rather than close it down. There are so many productions that are simply polemic in one direction. And my experience recently is that particularly young people, they're much more interested in hearing two sides of a case and coming to their own conclusion. And so this is a contribution in that direction, and I think it's going to stimulate a great deal of interest.
Which is perhaps instructive of why debates, particularly as a format, have become really popular among Christians and atheists. People turn out in great numbers these days for the kind of issues that many people think are sort of issues from the past, you know, the existence of God and so on.
Well, I think that's right. I think, though, that we're moving slightly away from the adversarial type debate, more to the type of thing you do in your program, which is a moderated discussion. And that, although it's more informal than a debate, often I think can carry more weight because it gets closer to the people. It doesn't demand an intensely prepared 15-minute speech with every letter in place.
Yes, indeed.
And it's much more real, spontaneous in the right sense, where people are talking about what they really believe rather than speaking to a prepared script, at least in the initial stages.
Well, there's certainly no prepared script ever on this programme, including me. But we're going to be having exactly that kind of a discussion and dialogue today. And my other guest who's joining me on the programme today is Lawrence Krauss. Thank you very much for joining me again on the programme this week to have this discussion with John Lennox on this whole issue of the cosmos and does it leave space for God. You've been involved more and more recently in discussing these issues. But I remember from what you said last week, what you're really concerned about is not so much attacking religious belief, but making people understand what science is about, what the universe is about. Is that correct?
Yes, and also trying to be skeptical of people misrepresenting it. But yeah, that's exactly it. That's the key thing that's important to me. That's what's worth stressing. I mean, God isn't important enough to spend any time worrying about, but the real universe is. At
what point did you kind of get onto this, though? Because you are now very much seen as part of that landscape of Dawkins and Harris and Dennett and so on. What's made you of late get so involved in this particular discussion?
Well, I think, things build up. I began to get involved in at least the discussion in general, actually in the United States, when I was trying to defend the teaching of evolution in school, but people who were so afraid of evolution that might attack their faith that they'd rather their children not know how the universe actually worked and not lose their faith. And that began, and because of that, I began to get more and more exposure to people who to people who suffered from the fact that they or their children were being the knowledge was being withheld from them because of faith, and it became clear to me that in many cases, religion and faith are the enemy of knowledge, and not in all cases, but in many cases. And I'd often said, and I still think, that science can't disprove the existence of some purpose to the universe that we don't know about. There's just no evidence of some purpose. So that aspect is true. But I realized I was being hypocritical in one sense, because while that's true, what is true is that all of the world's religions and scriptures are in complete disagreement with science. So you can have a vague deistic notion that's acceptable, but all the world's major religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they're all inconsistent with science, and it's inappropriate to argue otherwise.
Well, we're going to have this discussion between you and John on the programme today, and we're hearing a number of clips from this new DVD, The God Question, that's been released recently. And so what we'll do is we'll kick off with the first one, and this actually includes a little bit of John himself, who's one of the contributors on the DVD, but also Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris were featured in the videos as well. So let's hear this one as we look at whether there is a link between science and a rational creator.
Newton, for instance, when he discovered his law of gravitation, he didn't say, marvellous, now I understand how the universe works, I don't need God. He did the exact opposite. He said, what a marvellous God who did it that way.
What science has now achieved is an emancipation from that impulse to attribute these things to a creator. And it's a major emancipation.
Science is the most hostile context in which to try to maintain these beliefs about God.
To test these competing claims, we journey into the cosmos, where through observation, calculation and deduction, cosmologists have unravelled the story of its birth and development. Do such accounts shatter belief in the Creator, or provide powerful evidence for his existence? Does science leave space for God?
there's no question that someone is right and someone is wrong. These are mutually incompatible descriptions of reality. So if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to admit I'm going to spend eternity in hell.
Okay, so just a clip there from the God question from the first DVD on the cosmos. We heard from Sam Harris just at the end there. John, this has been the big argument in recent decades on whether advances in science are actually squeezing any explanations that might require a God out of it, or whether actually science has raised big questions that God is an adequate explanation for. So obviously you take the latter, but do you want to just explain how that isn't what's often seen as this idea of a God of the gaps, a sort of hypothesis where God is kind of just being used to justify smaller and smaller areas that science has yet to discover?
Yes, I think that's the heart of the matter, Justin, because what I see, and I see it as well in Lawrence's book, which I enjoyed reading, is that the God that they don't believe in is the God I don't believe in. That is the God of the gaps. And what is at the heart of this, I think, is a confusion over the nature of explanation. In Lawrence's book, A Universe for Nothing, I think one of the key statements is that when he comes to the question, why is there something rather than nothing, he says that he really is going to reinterpret that question. I quote, I am going to assume what this question really means to ask is, how is there something rather than nothing? How questions are really the only ones we can provide definitive answers to by studying nature. And so his concept of science is the idea that we're studying the how questions. But that leaves completely untouched the why question. Let me give an illustration of this that we can perhaps discuss. It seems to me that if you have a Ford motor car engine sitting in front of you, you can ask the scientific question of how it works and so on and so forth. But the why question is still a real question. Why did it came to be? And the answer to that question is in terms of a personal agent, Henry Ford. But the point is that that level of explanation doesn't conflict with the scientific explanation because it's an explanation of a different kind. And my impression from Richard Dawkins and Lawrence and others is they're still tilting away at the God of the gaps. They do that sometimes quite successfully, but they don't hit the real question.
Okay, so go on, Lawrence. What's your response?
Well, let me jump in. I've been there's so much wrong with that statement. It's hard to know where to begin. But the first point is that even in the question that John just said, it's not the fact that the Ford motor car came into existence doesn't presume an agent. It's how. It's the fact that Henry Ford had an idea. It's history. In fact, the point is that the why question, there is no why question in general. The why question is an invention. Because the why question presumes there must be purpose. But if there isn't purpose, then the question is irrelevant. So it presumes the answer before it asks the question. And so by asking why, you are immediately assuming that there's something that may not exist. And in every case, including the case of the Ford motor car that you just discussed, when we say why, we colloquially mean we say that in a vague way, but what we really mean is how. And
I don't think that's the case at all. We mean why. If we ask why, it's a why of purpose. And you are, I think, falling into exactly the same trap you're describing.
What purpose do you ascribe the universe to? What was the purpose of the universe?
Oh, the purpose of the universe is that God...
What if there's no purpose, John?
Oh, well, I'll investigate...
Then what's the why question got to do with anything? It presumes there's a purpose.
Lawrence...
And so I don't see how you can start with a question that presumes that there's something that there may not be. You should ask the question, is there a purpose?
Okay.
And then you should ask the question...
Well, of course I asked that question.
And then you should ask the question, is there any evidence of purpose?
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Any evidence of purpose, it's a reasonable assumption that there probably is a purpose.
Okay, well, let's allow John to present some evidence for purpose then.
Well, I think Lawrence is falling into the same trap he's describing. He seems to assume in his book that there's no purpose. Certainly the correct question to ask...
I just need to see some evidence for it.
Just half a second. I think there's massive evidence for it. The big evidence for it, speaking as a scientist, if you'll allow a pure mathematician to be a scientist, Lawrence, is the very fact that we can do science, that the universe is rationally intelligible, and that atheism simply undermines that. This is my biggest problem with your conclusions from your book, is that the book becomes unintelligible if I take your view, because the very mind you use to study the universe is, according to you, the end product of a purposeless, naturalistic process. Well, then why should I trust it? And that's why I agree very strongly with...
Hold on, you're a scientist, right? You're claiming you're a scientist. You should trust it because it makes predictions that are validated by observation. That's the only reason you should trust it.
I'm very impressed.
Not because it's rational or because it's intelligent or because it's stupid, but if it makes a claim and then you go on and do a test and the test doesn't work, then it's wrong.
But it's the fact that we can understand those claims. It's at a higher level than that. I'm very impressed by your colleague Thomas Nagel's arguments recently that the naturalistic project is defeating itself, and he's an atheist on your side.
Well, I don't care about people's comments or versions. Let's stick to the question itself. And I mean, I hate arguing the basis of authority, which is too often what's done on the theological perspective. And the point is that science proceeds, and the fact that the world is intelligible is truly remarkable. The fact, however,
Absolutely.
that our minds, which arose by a process of evolution within a natural context, can understand the laws that govern that natural context, it's amazing but not miraculous. It's not surprising, perhaps, that our brains, which are physical objects, happen to be able to, and since consciousnesses have risen, happen to be able to understand the same physical universe in which they arose.
It's entirely consistent, I think.
We don't understand how that happened, and it's amazing, but not miraculous.
Okay, so it's not miraculous, says Lawrence, John. But
it's amazing.
Yeah, but it's remarkable. Okay,
absolutely remarkable.
Let's allow you to respond then, John.
Well, I think that remarkable quality of it, and that we find ourselves to be persons being capable of purposes, is very consistent with the idea that behind this universe there is an intelligent God who has purposed it in the sense that he's caused it to be, and that the whole thing exists in order for us to explore the very universe we find ourselves in. And also, Lawrence asked me what its highest purpose is. Its highest purpose is that we, in the end, should not only do science, but be able to have a relationship with the God that created it all. Now, that seems to me to be perfectly consistent.
But it seems to me to be incredibly arrogant to assume the universe was created for us. Moreover, to argue that it is...
Well, why is it arrogant?
That God is very, very inefficient, that he had to create a universe
Lawrence,
with 100 billion galaxies so that we could exist.
Oh, come on, Lawrence. You've answered that question yourself. I mean, you point out in your book, I think it's in your book, but every cosmologist points it out, that in order to have the carbon in the universe in which, out of which life can be made, you have to have several generations of stars. So I think you refute your own argument of...
No. But the point is that, the point is, I don't know what life can be made. I know what our life is made of. I don't know what all life forms can be made of. I don't even know if carbon has to exist for life forms. All I know is most of the universe is incredibly hostile to life. So to suggest that God created this universe is just like the suggestion that God created me and designed me to be able to sit at a computer. But of course he didn't, because my back isn't designed to do that, which is why I get back pain.
You're not alone in thinking that. And it would be at this point very relevant, I think, to play a clip that I've got lined up here from the DVD again. Is the universe a place of pointless waste? Well, that's certainly the view of Michael Shermer and Sam Harris, who are both contributors on this DVD as well. Let's just hear a very quick snippet from the DVD on their view on this.
Right off the bat, why would a deity make a universe that's 13.7 billion light years in radius, in which practically none of it is usable? It's just a waste of stuff. Why would a deity do that?
It is the most wasteful and painfully wasteful system we could possibly devise. Nowhere in that mayhem is there the suggestion that man is somehow central.
So, John, let's hear your response to this, because I think a lot of people, this comes to them. It's like when you look at the massive size of the universe, we are a tiny little pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan put it, I think, on the edge of the Milky Way. Isn't it incredibly arrogant to assume that all of this is here because we were purposed by God?
It would be if we had no direction as to the fact that that is the case. Let me take first the scientific side. That if it is necessary to have all this great size and great length of time to produce human beings on a planet, the only beings that we know that can actually do science and be aware of this wonderful cosmic environment which we are, then that in itself, to my mind, would be an indicator of how important we are if it takes all this. But of course, Justin, I have another source of information, and I take seriously, Lawrence said at the beginning that all religions are inconsistent with science. I think that's a sweeping assertion that is false in the Christian case.
But did Jonah live inside the whale?
Yes, of course he did.
Oh, well, that's consistent with what we know about science?
Well, yes, I believe that...
How many people live inside a whale?
Now, just half a minute.
Your knowledge of biology and oxygen and the way the ocean works. Do you think that's consistent with what we know?
Lawrence, you haven't, let me finish my answer, and you've now raised the question of miracle, which I'm very happy to discuss in detail.
Okay, sorry.
But I'd like to finish my first point, which is that I do believe that God, if there is a God worthy of the name, I'm not surprised that he's revealed something about himself. And what he has revealed is that human beings are unique. They're made in his image. And that gives them an infinite value. I'm not impressed by arguments that say size, time, and so on are measures of value. We value some things that are extremely tiny and extremely small. A diamond is much smaller than a lump of coal, but I think people tend to value diamonds more. So the question is, do we have any information as to the status of our universe? And I believe the status as revealed in the Bible is that the universe has been created as a home for human beings made in God's image. And that changes the whole scene for me. And I see nothing in science that's inconsistent with that.
Well, let's jump. Am I allowed, do you want me to jump in or not?
Yeah, please do. Please go ahead, yeah.
Justin, I don't want to. Okay. Let's see. First of all, so therefore you're assuming there's not life elsewhere in the universe. There's not intelligent
No, I'm not
life.
assuming that at all.
That are not in the image of your God, or whichever
False
God that happens to be. Oh, okay. So God then, as you would put it, created the universe for all life forms that exist. Is that a more sensible statement than the one you made about humans?
No, it isn't a more sensible statement. We are ignorant about other life forms. I'm as ignorant as you are. Are they
just an accessory? Are they just an accessory, and God really we're the heart of it, but they just happen to be innocent bystanders, or did God create the universe for them too?
Well, clearly, let me just go back to the Christian position, which is that this is not necessarily the only world there is, and there are beings other than humans. There are angels and so on. So the answer is yes.
Let's say there are intelligent life forms elsewhere in the universe.
Yes, about which we know nothing, so I can make no judgment about them.
But okay, that's right. But I just asked the question. So if we discovered intelligent life, would that mean that you'd give up your belief, or that these people, or that God created the universe for those people as well, those beings as well? They're not people.
I would not give up my belief. I'd be fascinated, and
exactly.
I await the results.
You wouldn't give up your belief in the spite of any evidence, John, which is part of the whole problem.
That's entirely false, Lawrence.
And the second, and so let's
you're
go
making
back
a lot of assertions about my belief.
Go on, Lawrence.
But the second claim that somehow science is consistent is to say it's consistent as long as you give up science whenever it's inconsistent. As long as you give it up when you say, okay, well, look, the Earth, someone blew a horn and the sun stood still in the sky. Well, that's inconsistent with science. So let's just say right then and there, the laws of nature were suspended. Let's say the laws of nature are suspended here. So every time it's inconsistent, I have this incredible cop-out to say God did it. So forget God of the gaps. Your God is the God that whenever something is clearly impossible, it's okay because God did it. And so to me, that's just an intellectual cop-out and of incredible laziness.
Okay, let's hear a quick response, John, and then we'll go to a quick break.
Lawrence has raised the question of God intervening in the regularities that he has created. And I think there are reasons for that. And it is absolutely not a cop-out. I think what we've got is a universe with built-in regularities created by God. And sometimes God draws attention to himself by doing something very special. Now, science can deal with irregularities brilliantly, but science has nothing to say about singularities. I think, though, that behind all this is an a priori rejection of the possibility of the supernatural that lies at the heart of atheism. And therefore, Lawrence is bound from his position to reject any particular instance of it. And we really need to deal with the a priori question before we deal with the particular instances.
So let me just say, we have never, and you and I have never, well, maybe you have never witnessed the laws of nature being suspended. So the fact that it's never happened during a time in which one can validate it as a scientist, which needs to test it to see if it's really true, rather than accept it on hearsay or accept it on faith. That clear fact doesn't seem to get in your way. The point is that I'm not presuming that miracles can happen. I'm just saying there's never been any evidence for them. And if you claim they have happened, I think you, as a scientist, one would have to argue that one should accept the evidence for them. And so,
well, that's right.
As a very famous biologist once said, he's an atheist when he goes in the laboratory. He doesn't assume there's some invisible hand twiddling the knobs trying to trick him. He's measuring nature and he's making a prediction, and the observations will happen.
We're going to have to take
and therefore he'd be crazy to not be an atheist outside of it.
We're going to have to take a quick break there, gentlemen, and I will let you respond in just a moment, John. You're listening to Unbelievable with me, Justin Brierley. Today asking, does the cosmos leave space for God? With our discussion centering around a new set of documentary DVDs called The God Question, tackling questions of science, God, and the search for truth, with leading scientists, atheists, thinkers, in all directions. Find out more at thegodquestion.tv. And my guests today are Oxford professor John Lennox and physicist Lawrence Krauss from Arizona State University.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
Welcome back to the show, aiming to get you thinking every Saturday afternoon, part of the Faith Explored lineup of programming on Premier Christian Radio. Well, the ways to contact the show if you want to get in touch with anything you've heard so far or hear later on in the programme, you can find us online at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. And of course, there are links there to our Twitter and Facebook accounts at UnbelievableJB if you want to follow me on Twitter, and facebook.com/UnbelievableJB for the page where you can find out more about the programme. You can also email, of course, unbelievable@premier.org.uk. And today on the show, we're looking at a new DVD series on science, God, and the search for truth.
The God question is at the heart of an ongoing and sometimes acrimonious debate between those who see no role for God in the universe and others who view science as revealing the very handiwork of the Creator.
Religious explanations, although they may have been satisfying for many centuries, are now superseded and outdated.
I think contemporary cosmology is not merely consistent with the existence of a creator. I think it actually is supportive.
Sometimes I'm fond of calling myself a militant agnostic. I don't know, and you don't either.
Just a taster there of what's on the triple DVD series Exploring the God Question by Caris Productions. It's been an international TV series now available to buy and brings together a variety of scientists, professionals, philosophers, experts, drilling down on some of the biggest mysteries that the advance of science has brought about. Just reading from the quotes on the back cover of the DVD, this is Baroness Cox, member of the House of Lords. She says the current clash of theistic and atheistic worldviews is superbly presented in this series. Its creative marriage of style and content make it a must-see for anyone interested in the relationship between science and belief in a creator. There you go. Find out more at thegodquestion.tv. thegodquestion.tv. That's thegodquestion.tv. And my guests today are Professor John Lennox, Oxford mathematician and Christian thinker, and atheist physicist Lawrence Krauss of Arizona State University, one of the leading lights in the atheist movement at the moment. Well, we've been asking the question today, does the cosmos leave space for God? Gentlemen, we were in a discussion about miracles in that first half of the programme there. I would like us to return to that, and I think it will come out as we continue the discussion in a moment's time. Just perhaps time to hear just another little bit from the DVD now. And of course, one of the big issues in science and the science and faith dialogue recently has been the issue of whether the apparent order in the universe is evidence for a divine hand, a sort of creator, a mind behind the cosmos. Let's just hear a clip from the DVD as a few different people give their thoughts on the whole aspect of the origin of the Big Bang and fine-tuning of the universe and that kind of thing.
In terms of where the Big Bang came from or what started it, what powered it, we don't know.
And that really is genuinely difficult. We don't know. We understand essentially biology, we don't understand cosmology. In a sense, we could say cosmology is waiting for its Darwin.
A further mystery perplexing scientists is why, from the first seconds after the Big Bang, order began to emerge from what could have been complete chaos.
It was a big mystery as to how the Big Bang went bang and produced such order in the universe. Because if you put a stick of dynamite in a pile of bricks, bang, you've got a total mess.
In this newly born universe, the laws of physics went immediately to work producing chemical elements that laid the foundations for life. Within 3 minutes, there was helium and hydrogen, vital for the development of stars. With stars, there can be light. With hydrogen, there could be water. With water, there could be life.
What you see is something which is almost completely featureless, just hot gas, and yet now we have the extraordinary richness and diversity of the galaxies and the stars, and all of this has developed since.
If life as we know it was ever to exist, the elements formed in the early universe needed to be in the right balance. In the case of helium and hydrogen, somehow that was the result of split-second timing.
If, in fact, the elements had formed not at the end of 3 minutes, but at the end of 30 seconds, then the universe would start out as almost pure helium, with very little hydrogen. Now, hydrogen is pretty important to us. Would the little bit of hydrogen left be enough to allow for the existence of life? I don't know. I mean, it would be a very different universe.
Just another clip there from the DVD, The God Question, and that aspect of it raising questions around whether we can deduce any purpose behind the apparent fine-tuning of the universe. Steven Weinberg was the last voice you heard on that clip, who is an atheist physicist himself. Others included Paul Davies, Kim Weaver and Richard Dawkins in that element from the DVD. So, Lawrence, I know this is an area that you are strongly opposed to the idea of inferring any kind of design, but just because of these apparent fine-tuning aspects of the universe.
Well, there aren't as many apparent. I mean, first of all, I found that a number, at least the narrator in that video, incredibly misrepresented things in terms of the elements forming. With hydrogen, by the way, you don't have water. You have to have oxygen too, in case you didn't know that. But in any case, the bottom line is that, you know, it's the same fallacy that we had before Darwin, that bees and animals, every life form seemed to be fine-tuned for its environment. Surely they were designed. But what we discovered is that simple laws of nature, in fact, that genetic diversity among the population and natural selection can produce the entire diversity of life on Earth. No design is necessary. And so we like to look for design in nature, and we like to infer things from it, but we have to be very careful about assuming that things were designed. For example, it would be very surprising to find ourselves living in a universe in which we couldn't live. We evolved in the universe with the laws of nature that exist now. So it's not too surprising that our existence is contingent on those laws and the nature of the universe. But you could ask the question: could things be very different and still have intelligent life? And the answer is quite possibly. And we don't know anything about the nature of life. So to assume that the universe is fine-tuned for life is to assume that we are the only kinds of life that can exist, which is an incredibly ridiculous assumption. That's the first thing. Let me just jump in one more thing and say the second thing is that this fine-tuning in many cases is nonsense. There are certain quantities which were they different we would not be here, but that's not fine-tuning. Because most of the universe, as I point out, the universe could be much better tuned for life than it is. In fact, perhaps the biggest supposed fine-tuning problem, which is the energy of empty space, which motivated my recent book, in some sense, the fact that the energy of empty space is remarkably small, 120 orders of magnitude smaller than we would have predicted, but it's not zero. Some people said, well, that's amazing because that's fine-tuned for life. Well, if it were exactly zero, which is which is a complete non-fine-tuned number. It's what everyone thought the number was. It would, because of laws of symmetry in mathematics, you could easily explain zero. Then there'd be much more life in the universe. So if the universe is fine-tuned for life, then God did a pretty rotten job of fine-tuning it.
Okay, well, two objections there, and so let's let John take them in turn. Firstly, well, we're here. It's no surprise that we then find ourselves in a universe fine-tuned for our existence, or else we wouldn't be witnessing it, and so on. And who knows what could have happened with a different set of values, perhaps different forms of life. What's your response to that, John?
Well, it's to say that remark doesn't answer the question as to why there is a universe that has permitted life like we've got it. I think John Leslie, the philosopher, he made the point long ago that Lawrence's point is like saying, if a firing squad is shooting at me, to say to me, you shouldn't be surprised if you find yourself alive after they shoot, because after all, that's the only thing you could experience. And Leslie said, of course, your surprise would be that they all missed. So I think that statement actually completely misses the point. It doesn't answer why it is, or even how it is. Going back to Lawrence's insistence on the how question, how it is that there is a universe that's suitable for life. So I find myself, and it's interesting here because Lawrence clearly belongs to those cosmologists who are skeptical of fine-tuning. But there are many who are not. And how do I choose? For instance, Stephen Hawking in his book, The Grand Design, is massively impressed by the fine-tuning, so that he has to go to enormous lengths, which I find unimpressive, to explain it away. And the final point I'd make here...
Well, I mean, fine-tuning exists, but you're telling me that fine-tuning exists so we can be here, and that's a very different thing. There's certain constants that are not understood that have very weird and unusual values. We call that fine-tuning. But it's not at all related to the existence of human beings. And to make that assumption,
I see. Yes, I see.
The statement.
I see the point you're making. No, there's fine-tuning. There's fine-tuning at the biological level, and there's a fine-tuning at the cosmological level. And I was taught physics by John Polkinghorne, Lawrence. And
that's probably part of the problem.
But then this is a question. You're making a statement. You don't like me responding to authority, but you're making a statement that the fine-tuning is not to be taken seriously, when I find that the majority of the voices, including Paul Davis, your colleague, seem to be going in the opposite direction. And what's more, I find it very consistent with the motivation of Newton and Kepler. I mean, one of the big things in this is the history of science, that it exploded in a Christian background, and belief in God, far from hindering the rise of science, was the motor that drove it, because people...
Look. That's a fallacious argument right there, because
it's not a fallacious. Why is it fallacious?
Hold on, the Christian Church was the only game in town. It was the National Science Foundation of the time. If you weren't associated with the Christian Church, you wouldn't be educated. So the fact that it arose out of the only authority, that money and power at the time, is not too surprising.
Oh, but what you're forgetting is that there were other cultures like the Chinese. And you will recall that Joseph Needham, the expert chemist and sinologist, for years tried to fit the lack of rise of modern science, abstract science in China, into the atheistic Marxist principle. And in the end, he came to the conclusion that the reason that modern science didn't rise there was their lack of the unifying concept of a creator. So I think there's evidence in the other direction.
Well, I mean, I think that kind of historical argument again is just, first of all, I think it's ridiculous, but secondly, it's irrelevant. The point is what the origin, whether there was a Christian society or whether science, let me even agree with you at the moment and say, okay, science owes its origins to Christianity. Thanks very much. We don't need you anymore. You did a great job. You got us here. Now get out of the way.
But Lawrence, that seems to me to be very superficial, because the basic premise that shot science forward is this rational intelligibility of the universe. And the fine-tuning is very consistent with it. You know, this is a cumulative argument.
The first statement you say is correct. The second statement, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. The fine-tuning that we're amazed at is a fine-tuning that is not directly related to the existence of human beings.
But it's directly half a minute. Of course it is, because if you didn't have a universe like this, you've just told me, we wouldn't have human beings in it. So the relationship is clearly there.
It's also related to the existence of stars and planets where there's no life. It's necessary.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct.
It's also absolutely necessary for supernovae that explode, that probably kill life forms on their planets. It's responsible for everything that happens, absolutely. And because life exists in our universe, that's a corollary of the universe having its current properties. But it's not. There's no evidence that is the guiding principle behind those fine-tunings. It's responsible for everything we see. Because life exists in our universe, obviously it's one of the things we see.
Just a quick response, John, and then I'd like to move us on to a different aspect.
Well, of course, the unspoken question hanging here is Lawrence constantly talking about the laws of nature. It does raise the question where those come from. And that, again, that mathematical describability is, to me, evidence of an intelligent creator.
Well, let's talk about this.
It's evidence for you, but that's a leap of faith on your part.
Well, let's talk about this, because this does come up in other aspects of this DVD as well. This kind of the fact that the universe seems so fruitful to rational inquiry. It seems open, willing almost, for us to discover these symmetries and these laws and so on. And it's your contention, John, that it needn't necessarily have been that way, but the fact that it is, for you, it denotes that there is some kind of an intelligent mind that almost wanted us to discover this universe.
I think that's right, and I think Lawrence agreed with that essentially by saying it needn't have been that way. There could have been all kinds of other things. But the fact that it is that way and that we can understand it, at least in part, certainly reasonably points in the direction of a rational creator. I think
so. The beautiful symmetry of a snowflake.
Yes.
Which is just due to the fact that hydrogen is a polar molecule with 57-degree angles or whatever. It looks, if you look at it, it looks like a Christmas ornament. It looks like there's a purpose because it's so beautiful and symmetric. It's an accident of chemistry with an electromagnetism. And this is, all humans are hardwired to be looking for, I think, I don't know, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but it certainly seems when you make statements like that I see beauty, I see regularity, therefore must be a designer, well, then you're arguing in some sense that every time a snowflake is made, someone's designing it. And of course, that's not the case.
No, not at all. No, that's absurd. You're quite right. It is something coming from those wonderful laws of nature whose origin you haven't told me about. But I think we need to distinguish a couple of things here. One of the things that convinces me even more that there's a designer is the semiotic nature, for instance, of some of the things that we have discovered relatively recently. We are people that can produce texts, and we discover in each of the 10 trillion cells of our body, there's the longest word we've ever discovered. Now, you were saying earlier, and I agreed with you, that we virtually know nothing about the origin of life. Dawkins admitted it on that clip. But surely just a minute, whatever the processes, the natural processes involved, here we are faced with text, with meaningful text, full of codons and coding for things. To my mind, that is very consistent and points towards the concept that comes at the beginning of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, all things came to be through him. That, in other words, information, design, code are primary and mass energy are secondary. You turn it round and you have mass energy primary and mind and everything else derivative. And that's where we fundamentally
hold on. Most
disagree.
of the universe doesn't have genes. Well, as far as we know, I mean,
no, we're talking about the
life
living
forms here
world.
on Earth have a genetic code. You're absolutely correct. Whether it's unique in the universe, we don't know about. So most of the universe doesn't involve those little ACT, little bit code, which is incredible for biology. So to argue that it's a central guiding force of the universe is to once again put us at the center of the universe. And I think, John, that's what you're doing. You have taken a giant leap backwards and argued that we are the center of the universe. And one of the great things about science is it's shown we're not.
I was never expecting you guys to get into agreement on whether there was a design behind the cosmos and so on. But it's been fascinating to hear your different perspectives on this and whether the apparent fine-tuning of the universe is suggestive of a mind behind it. Of course, the other big issue that has been, at the forefront of things has been this issue of whether the Big Bang, the fact that the latest theories appear to suggest a beginning point to the universe, suggests that there was something beyond that to start it off. And indeed, of course, this was the subject of your most recent book that we had you on this programme for last year, Lawrence, A Universe from Nothing. Is it possible to speak of the universe coming into existence literally from nothing? Well, it's an issue that, again, the DVD on the cosmos from the God question does address. Let's just hear another short clip from this. This includes speakers such as Peter Atkins, Alexander Vilenkin and others as they look at the possibility of a universe from nothing.
If God didn't cause the universe to exist, what did?
What science cannot yet do, and one day I think it will have to turn to doing, is thinking about how a universe can come into existence without intervention, from absolutely nothing, without a creator. And that's going to be really tough for science.
There is one answer that appears to avoid this problem. The idea is that the universe could be spontaneously created out of nothing.
To understand how a universe might be created out of nothing, we must turn to the theory of quantum mechanics. It describes how, in the tiny world of the atom, small particles seem to appear and disappear for no obvious reason. Apparently absurd. Imagine if, in our everyday world, people appeared and disappeared without obvious cause, and yet the theory of quantum mechanics describes how this can happen at the atomic level, and that might offer an alternative to a creator.
There is no question that our universe is quantum mechanical. If you ask what caused this universe to pop out, there is no cause, there is just probability for this to happen, and so it happens.
It could be that if a kind of chaotic universe tumbled out of nothing, then it wouldn't survive. It would just collapse back to real nothing. And it may be that our universe happens to be that happy chance of nothing transforming itself into what seems to be something that seems to persist.
But still the question remains. Could a universe really come from absolutely nothing?
We still have to have some physics. We still have to have a universe-generating mechanism with all sorts of properties. We still have to have a means of distributing laws among the universes that get created.
The thing is, our horizon for what we can see only encompasses our universe. So if there were another one, or many, the question is, how would we see them?
There you go. Another taster from the DVD, The God Question, and this is the first DVD in the three-part series on the cosmos. Does it leave space for God is the question that we're asking on the programme today. So coming back to this question then, gentlemen, that we heard in that clip from the programme, this idea, it seems very counterintuitive, Lawrence, and in your book you attempted to show why you do believe that it's logical to talk about a universe literally popping into existence from nothing. Do you want to reflect on what you heard in that clip?
Yeah, well, again, I'm a little worried about this DVD now. I haven't seen it, but it seems to be pretty biased. But use the word believe there, and I try not to use the word believe as a scientist. But what I tried to show is that, and was discussed a little bit in that DVD, is remarkably a central point of my book. If you ask what would be the characteristics of a universe that would have come from nothing by the laws of physics, at least as we understand, that those of the universe, the characteristics of the universe would be precisely the characteristics of the universe we observe. Does that prove that happened? Absolutely not, but it makes it plausible. And the fact that it's plausible is remarkable and worth celebrating. Now, the point is that we don't understand the ultimate laws of physics, so what we're doing is speculating on this, but we have had revolutionary developments in our observational understanding and our theoretical underpinning that have allowed us at least to get to the threshold of realizing that it's plausible. It, first of all, seems like a miracle. In fact, it was a miracle of the Bible, that you could get 100 billion galaxies, well, not in the Bible because I didn't know about them, but that you could get everything we see in the universe, all the stars, from no stars. It seems like it violates some laws of physics, and one of the great discoveries is it doesn't violate any laws of physics to create all of the observed matter in the universe from no matter. It's the first kind of miracle that science has shown is not a miracle, and then one can proceed from there. So this question, it does seem counterintuitive, but the great thing about science is it has told us that our intuition is not worth relying upon. We, as Richard Dawkins often says, has evolved on the savannah to escape lions, not to understand quantum mechanics.
I mean, you believe that in that sense, the discovery of Big Bang cosmology and the theories that now have actually squeezed God out of the explanatory position, if you like, rather
the
than...
whole history of God is, the whole history of science is not just to squeeze God out. God was never there in the first place. It make it seem as if this God question is an important one. As Steve Weinberg, who was also on the video, said, most scientists don't even think enough about God to know if they're atheists. It's never discussed at meetings. You never need to talk about God to understand anything in the universe that we see. And therefore, God is completely irrelevant to the physical universe and everything we've discovered in the last 500 years. So God is never, it's not like he's been squeezed out, he's never there in the first place.
Okay, well, we'll get a response from John Lennox on the whole question of a universe from nothing in a moment's time and whether God is a satisfactory explanation. You're listening to Unbelievable with me, Justin Briley, Saturday afternoon. Hope you're enjoying today's programme. Don't forget, some of your feedback will be coming up later on in the show, but we're going to be concluding our discussion on the God question. We're looking at the God question DVD series on the programme today, and we're asking, does the cosmos leave space for God? Be back in a moment's time. Welcome back to Unbelievable, the third and final part of the show with me, Justin Briley, this Saturday afternoon, part of the Faith Explored range of programming every Saturday on Premier Christian Radio. That includes, of course, the Profile interview, a new interview slot every Saturday afternoon between 4 and 5, immediately after this programme. And today's interviewee is Eric the Eagle Ocheng. He's a rising British boxing talent, and he's in conversation today with Premier's Marcus Jones. He'll be explaining how he reconciles his faith with knocking people out for a living. So that's one not to miss between 4 and 5 this afternoon. Next week, if you come back for Unbelievable, well, we're doing a second show looking at another of the documentary films in the God Question DVD series, this time on mind and consciousness, asking whether there's evidence for God or a soul, and whether the human mind is a product of natural processes alone. Two other exciting guests join me for that one too. Michael Roos is a philosopher of science who describes himself as an atheist agnostic. He's going to be one of my guests, and the other is Keith Ward, a Christian philosopher of mind who's no stranger to this programme. So I'm thinking it'll be quite a different but no less engaging discussion at the same time next week from 2:30. Hope you can come back for that. And of course, if you want to find it online, it's at premier.org.uk/Unbelievable that you'll be able to download the podcast. And of course, today's programme available from that address, plus links to my guests today if you want to find out more about Professor John Lennox, or indeed Lawrence Krauss, or indeed the DVD that we've been discussing today, The God Question. Do go there. Don't forget you can email in with your thoughts on today's programme, unbelievable@premier.org.uk. And I'll be reading out some of your thoughts on previous programmes towards the end of today's show. Also encourage you to get in touch via Twitter @UnbelievableJB if you want to follow the show. And of course, you can get in touch on the Facebook page as well. Don't forget we have a new video website as well. We launched it a few weeks ago. It's all the videos from the Unbelievable conference in May this year, the leading apologetics conference now in the UK. So if you want to watch all the videos for free, do check out the link at premier.org.uk/Unbelievable. apologetics. Okay, time to get back into the final part of today's show.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
And we've been asking the question, does the cosmos leave space for God? It's all in relation to a new DVD series that's come out recently called The God Question, Science, God and the Search for Truth. We've had on the show with me today Professor John Lennox. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's an Oxford professor of mathematics by background and a well-known Christian thinker. Well, he's been in conversation with Lawrence Krauss, who's an atheist physicist from Arizona State University and author, of course, of last year's book, A Universe from Nothing, which he came on to talk to us about when that was first released. John, let's have you respond then to this whole area of the beginning of the universe and whether it could have come from nothing and so on. Just give us your thoughts on that clip and Lawrence's thoughts on it.
Well, let me take the last point first. You never need to talk about Henry Ford if you're discussing how a Ford engine works. They're different kinds of questions. So I take Lawrence's point, but I think it completely misses the issue. Now, as to the universe out of nothing, it's not that I simply find it counterintuitive. I find it totally incomprehensible, increasingly so as I come through Lawrence's book. What am I to make of, for instance, the statement, since something is physical, nothing must be physical? That, to my mind, pardon me for saying so, is complete nonsense. And
nothing then, John?
Nothing in the ordinary sense.
No,
nothing in the ordinary philosophical sense is the absence of.
I don't care about philosophy.
Well, that's your problem, Lawrence. That's your problem.
But we're talking science here.
You are writing for the general public, and you're claiming that the universe comes from nothing, and you give 3 or 4 different definitions of it, which are increasingly speculative. And the first one, this business, since something is physical, nothing must be, is just a nonsense statement.
What is nothing, then? Is nothing not the absence of something?
It's the absence of anything. And it's therefore the absence of space. It's the absence. It's the absence. I'm trying to respond, Lawrence. I let you speak.
Okay.
You're not letting me speak.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Okay. What it seems to me your book does, and is to, because you cannot answer the question in the ordinary sense of getting something out of nothing in its commonly understood sense, you make a series of progressively speculative redefinitions of nothing. You first of all have nothing as empty space or a quantum vacuum, and then you talk about electron-positron pairs popping out of empty space near a nucleus of an atom. So that's not nothing. You have to have atoms there for that to happen. And then you begin to try to remove space analogically using that first analogy. So it becomes increasingly more speculative until you get to the point where you say everything not forbidden by the laws of physics must happen. But that's nonsense as well. Physics doesn't prevent an earthquake happening in London, but it doesn't mean that that must happen one day. So I think you need to clear up your ideas about nothing.
Well, I mean, now that you've misrepresented the book, we can go on. I mean, the point is that... the point is that you said as commonly understood, as commonly represented nothing. Well, I suggest to you that nothing is not commonly represented. Like many words, it's a colloquial term that means many different things to many people, including in the Bible. Word nothing really referred to an infinite void, not which many people would say is empty space. And I think if you asked most people what is nothing, you'd come up with the idea of empty space, for example. I've argued that's probably not a good enough definition of nothing. But if empty space is your definition of nothing, then it's perfectly, not only will something come from it, something is required to come from it. And so science has just changed the definitions. And people may not like that, but I call it learning.
Okay. Well, you're trying to convince the world of this thing, and I find reading your book, and I think I've read it 4 times now, and I've enjoyed reading most of it. I find it less and less convincing. In fact, interestingly enough, I did a debate with Alan Guth at MIT not long ago, and I asked him about this question. I said, Alan, Is it the case that when you talk about nothing, you are not talking about nothing in the commonly accepted sense of absence of being? And he said, no, we are not. So he seemed to agree with me in the common understanding of nothing.
The question I would agree that absence of being is not a bad definition, and it's certainly clear that space and time didn't exist, and space and time came into existence.
But then that ruins your initial statement. If you think it's absence of being, you cannot say that it is physical, since something is physical. Surely that's straight nonsense.
Yeah, no, I have to know what being is to know what the absence of it is. Darkness is the absence of light. Don't you think I have to know what light is in order to know what darkness is? It doesn't define darkness. I have to know what light is.
But I didn't make the statement, Lawrence. You made it. So I presume you know what you're talking about. And to say that because something is physical, you must know what something is, nothing must be physical. But nothing, by any definition, is it's the opposite of something. It's the absence of something. And you are attributing the property of physicality to something and its exact opposite, in fact, the absence of it. And to my mind, that is clearly nonsense.
Well, let me make it clear. You misunderstand what I mean by physical. I mean, when I say physical, and I think you would agree with it, I'm saying that in order to define that quantity, it's not a spiritual quantity. It's not a ephemeral quantity. It's something that to be accurately defined requires a physical definition, and the physical definition of it is the absence of something. And that's a physical definition. Now, I'm not saying it's physical in the sense that there are physical entities associated with something. I'm saying it requires a physical definition, and that's what I mean.
But a physical definition and saying that nothing is physical are two different things. What on earth do you mean by physical definition?
Let me move this on, gentlemen, if you don't mind, because I mean the question that this ultimately comes down to is in the end, even beyond the questions of how you define nothing and whether the universe came from nothing, is God a good explanation for the genesis, the creation of the universe? Now, I know that what you're going to say, Lawrence, is it just isn't an explanation. Only science can give us that.
Which God, first of all? Which God? I mean, the point is there's no explanation. God doesn't explain a darn thing, never has, never will. It's a word that some people invent. It means many different things in many different times in human history, in many different places. And so to argue that this non-defined, it's much worse than the word nothing. God has no meaning, no definition. It just is what people want it to be in order to allow them to understand something that they don't understand. And that, okay, that's fine, I'll buy it. But it doesn't explain anything.
Okay, so Lawrence's contention is you're not actually, in the end, explaining anything, John, by suggesting that God somehow is responsible for the...
Well, that's the same kind of thing as saying Henry Ford doesn't explain anything. The point is there are certain things in our universe that do not carry, I believe, a reductionistic explanation. And Lawrence thinks, and the whole tenor of his book is this, that if you could reduce and reduce and reduce to what he calls nothing, and which I think is incoherent, then he's got rid of God. So what he's tilting against is the God of the gaps. So he is, whether he likes it or not, defining God as a God of the gaps. I believe that God is the God who created the whole show. And I must say in this, the God of the Bible, the personal God who created
but not
and
the God of the
upholds the
Quran
universe.
Or the God or Zeus or any of those people. You're
certainly
claiming
not.
Special knowledge that your God of your Bible is the one that did it.
Yes, because I believe God revealed himself. Now, that's another issue, but let me come back just to this. I would stand with Alan Sandage, who's regarded, as you know, Lawrence, as one of the fathers of modern astronomy, discovered the quasar and so on, where he said, God to me is a mystery, but he is the answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? So there are at least some considerably high-powered astrophysicists who feel not only is there space for God, but space itself was created by God. I do not, I insist, believe in your God of the gaps.
But that argument that some scientists believe, there are scientists in my country who are Republicans. I can't understand that either. All it shows is that that people can believe many, scientists are human, as most people may be surprised to hear. And the fact that some scientists are religious is just a reflection of their humanity. But it doesn't mean...
Well, it may be a reflection of their intelligence as well, Lawrence. I mean, should I believe you or Sandage, for instance? I'm listening to you both.
You should ask the question, what evidence is there? You shouldn't believe anyone. There are no scientific authorities. That's the key thing I try and convey. You don't quote people, Lawrence Krauss or Alan Sandage or anything else. The question is, what evidence does the universe provide? And that's what the listeners of this program should listen to, is what evidence, what physical evidence, what falsifiable evidence, what tests can you make?
But you have given me no evidence for atheism. In fact, your book has helped confirm my faith, because your book, written from an atheist perspective, is actually tilting at exactly what I thought it would tilt against, a God of the gaps. You don't admit the why question.
There's no God, by the way.
No, I know you don't.
You need a God to create a universe. That's all I asked the question. And suddenly people like you insist that that's a statement of fundamentalist atheism, when, to me, asking the question, the fact that it threatens people like you, suggests that you have something to be threatened by.
It doesn't threaten me in the slightest.
Well, I never made the statement. You say it's an atheist book. You find the statements in there that there is no God. You find me one statement that there's no God in that book.
Are you not an atheist?
Okay, I just say, look, is it based on what we know about the universe? Is there any evidence that you need a God to do it? And the answer is, at this point, no. And it's remarkable, and we're celebrating. And I think that and just asking the question.
You're celebrating that there's no God necessary.
Sorry.
You're celebrating that no God is necessary.
Oh, personally, I think it's great, but that's irrelevant.
Well, it's been fascinating, gentlemen. I'm obviously it's come around again at the end here to this question of whether we need explanations that go beyond a sort of reductionistic natural explanations, and are those the only kind of valid explanations as well? I suspect we probably haven't had time to go into the ins and outs of why, Lawrence, perhaps you don't see that God could ever be an explanation anyway in and of itself. But that
I resent the idea of reductionism as all being reduced to reductionism. It's not that. But anyway, that's for another program.
Well, maybe it is.
Well, there's another thing for another program as well, Lawrence. Don't get the impression that my belief in God depends on the solution of the question, why is there something rather than nothing? I think the marvelous thing about the Christian faith is that there's another dimension altogether, that God has revealed himself in the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and it's there that the main weight of the evidence occurs. And to add to that, there's the evidence of experience, the relationship with God through Christ. I discover not only in my own life, but that of many others, is real. So it all fits together in a big cumulative picture.
Well, I think you've revealed a lot, because what you revealed is that that's the fundamental basis of your faith. And basically, since you believe so strongly, you're willing to you believe all the other stuff must fit in. So I think that's fine. That's you've been honest.
But my faith is evidence-based, as you claim yours is.
Well, you haven't. No, you didn't say that. You said it was based on all sorts of things about Jesus Christ and stuff.
Yes, but this is evidence-based. I believe the resurrection occurred as a matter of history.
Have you ever met him?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever? I mean, don't say it's evidence-based. It's based on your reading of the document. But anyway, that's a different...
But the document is evidence, Lawrence. Your science is based on a reading of nature. Of course it's evidence.
What about The Great Gatsby? That's a document. Do you believe in The Great Gatsby?
Well, you...
I mean, don't look... Anyway, it's. I think the point you made is
but this is an absurd comparison.
Is that cosmology...
Principia Mathematica is a document.
I mean, in the end, gentlemen, if I can just interrupt, because we must sign off here. Obviously, it is that whole issue of different. What counts as evidence? What are there other kinds of evidence that we can hold up as verifying our experience and so on? That people who do claim that they have evidence of God's action in their lives, or indeed evidence from Scripture, history, and so on. But again, something for another program. In the meantime, gentlemen, it's been really fantastic having you both on. I was so pleased to be able to get you both. Sincere thanks, Lawrence, for making yourself available. And thank you also, John, for being with us today. Thank you as well for listening to today's programme.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
Well, you can find out more, of course, as ever, at premier.org.uk/unbelievable, the show page of this programme. You can find links to both my guests, Lawrence Krauss and John Lennox, who joined me today. And, of course, more information on the God Question DVD. premier.org.uk/unbelievable. Plus, of course, links to past programmes. And I'll make sure to include a couple of links on today's programme to other ones that might pique your interest. We're going to get some of your emails as well in a moment's time on last week's very sparky discussion also on those debates between Lawrence Krauss and William Lane Craig that they came on to reflect on. First of all, though, I wanted to let you know about a new apologetics group launching in Leicestershire. This Steve Cooper sends me this information today. Say that on Saturday the 19th of October there'll be the first meeting at Holy Trinity Church in Leicester on Regent's Road. That's Saturday the 19th of October from 2 till 5 p.m. in the afternoon. Tom Price and Martin Smith of the Zacharias Trust are going to be speaking, and the vision is to make apologetics resources available to all regional churches and promote interchurch fellowship through the events and activities. So if you're in the Leicestershire area and it's your kind of thing, why not get along to that? Find out more at holytrinityleicester.org. Here's some reflection on last week's reflections on the debates between William Lane Craig and Lawrence Krauss that took place as part of the God, the Universe and Nothing series of events in Australia over the summer. They both came on to say how they had found the debates, to reflect on some parts of those debates, including Craig's justification of the Canaanite passages in Scripture, what Krauss thought about that, and also the arguments for the resurrection. Lots and lots of interest in this show. Rich says, thank you for the recent dialogue. I found Krauss's philosophical and biblical historical knowledge to be shockingly poor for someone who could stand before an audience purporting to be one worthy of dialogue on the subject of God and science. There was a certain irony to Krauss's incensed attitude towards anyone who would dare take the public stage to speak on a subject one doesn't understand and repeatedly mischaracterizes either out of ignorance or willful deceit. Perhaps Krauss might want to look up the term hoist with one's own petard. Gary in North London says, once again an atheist, Lawrence Krauss gets very upset about events in the Old Testament, a book which they claim is untrue. So it's curious this is so emotive to those who don't believe. It's basically God doesn't exist and I hate him. If humans are just accidental organisms and evolved through survival of the fittest and random mutations, then what the Hebrew did to the Canaanites wasn't actually wrong. In fact, atheists who take this argument are actually corresponding to the belief that humans are special creatures, as they apply a criteria of objective morality to humans which no atheist would apply to animals. But what standard of morality are atheists appealing to? As C.S. Lewis said, where did I get this idea of right and wrong? Personally, I think atheists believe in far bigger miracles, and I've never heard a good atheistic explanation for the origin of matter and energy, the beginning of life, how reproduction evolved, etc. Well, don't know if you will have heard one on this programme, Gary, but thank you for getting in touch. On the other hand, there were those who came out in defence of Craig, in defence of Krauss and against Craig. Kai Zilga in San Jose, California says, please, no more of William Lane Craig. He's the living proof for the superiority of secular morality, as well as being intellectual dishonest. Dawkins is absolutely right not to debate him, but he can't damage a truly honest and excellent show like yours, says Guy. Thank you. Michael says, how ironic that Bill Craig felt himself sorely treated in his dialogues with Lawrence Krauss during their speaking engagements in Australia. Perhaps he longs for the days when Christians could treat their heretics to imprisonment, torture and death by fire for daring to express themselves. Okay, so not sure that quite justifies Krauss's use of the buzzer and so on in his debates with William Lane Craig, but obviously you feel he's only giving as good as he gets. Sauce for the goose, as you put it. Jim says, as a former Christian and current agnostic, I'd like to comment. While I was uncomfortable with Lawrence Krauss and his many interruptions during the dialogue, I think I understand where he's coming from. If Bill Craig wants to say that the Canaanite campaign was God's judgment against an evil group of people, and that if there's any real harm done, it's against the Israelite soldiers who are asked by God to enact his judgment, well, the very same argument could be made for the 9/11 hijackings. If Allah is the true God, he has the right to enact judgment against the infidel. Thus on 9/11 the only real harm was done against the promising young men who were commissioned by Allah to enact his judgment. If you find this logic unconvincing or even offensive, you'll understand why people outside of these worldviews do too. So that's Jim's thought on that. Whereas Stephen says, listening to last week's show, it's tempting to paraphrase The Guardian's Andrew Brown on Sam Harris and say anyone tempted to think that the abolition of religion would make the world a wiser and better place should study the works of Lawrence Krauss. As far as I can make out, Krauss's argument is that belief in heavenly salvation for the truly innocent makes it easier to carry out atrocities with a clear conscience. Well, okay, but greater thinkers such as Camus and Nietzsche have observed how the dark side of unbelief is nihilism, and that also sounds like a pretty good mandate for massacres. Earlier this year I read a revealing short essay, Does Religion Do Harm? New Evidence, from America's Centre for Inquiry, arguing that religion is harmful as it encourages the perception that one's life is sacred and something to be valued. The Canaanite massacre may be mythological, but the war on terror most certainly isn't, so it's curious that Krauss has little to say about Christopher Hitchens' support for a preemptive military offensive, nor of Harris's flirtation with the idea of a preemptive nuclear strike, not to mention his defence of torture. There you go. Lots more emails here. I haven't got time to read them all, I'm afraid. Let's quickly lead a little bit from Peter Byram, who says, Lawrence Krauss claims to be a man of science who values empirical evidence and experiments. I'm therefore going to make a scientific prediction for your upcoming show. I predict that Krauss will be just as obnoxious, impatient and unprofessional as he was during his dialogues with William Lane Craig. Well, you've probably heard the show by now, Peter, so I wonder what you did make of your prediction. Bettings and predictions aside, Krauss was pathetic in all dialogues. If the situation were reversed and Dr. Craig had constantly shouted over Krauss, disrupted his speeches with a buzzer, and repeatedly called him a liar and charlatan, Krauss would doubtlessly have denounced such behaviour as an evil of religion and claimed that it showed his opponent insecurity and close-mindedness. Also, Lawrence Krauss sank to about the lowest level of anti-intellectualism I've ever seen from a new atheist during the Sydney dialogue, because he attacked deductive logic itself. He used this example. 1. All mammals exhibit homosexual behaviour. 2. William Lane Craig is a mammal. 3. Therefore, William Lane Craig exhibits homosexual behaviour. His point was to argue that while the premises were true, the conclusion was false. However, this example does nothing to undermine syllogistic logic. All it shows is that Krauss doesn't know how to argue logically. He commits the fallacy of equivocation in this example, confusing all species of mammal with all members of all species of mammal. That and the fact that he was ultimately making a deductive syllogism himself about logic, of course, refutes itself. He's relying upon a syllogism to attack a syllogism. Thank you very much. And thanks also to Adam, who says, I found it a tough listen. Like your previous show on 1 Samuel chapter 15, I found the pro-faith justification unconvincing. It didn't help me with this and similar passages where God seems to condone brutality and savagery and the suffering of the innocent. If we're meant to turn to the Bible to find God, then these passages do appear to me to be a serious problem. I've yet to find a commentary that is helpful. Well, there you go. Obviously, there were a number of other things discussed in the programme apart from the question of the Canaanite passages in Scripture. There are, of course, other views out there, ways of looking at it to William Lane Craig, and indeed someone who's certainly wanted to put their point of view across, a former guest of this show, is Randall Rouser, who has been in touch when we've done that subject previously. As an evangelical, takes a different view on those passages and how one interprets them in the light of Christ. So if you want to find out more about that, his website is randallrouser.com. Look for genocide, search for genocide. I think most of the posts that he's put on that are tagged under that title. Just to finish off, Adam, you also say that the extraterrestrial intelligence show was a good one. You say you've always been a sci-fi fan, and for most of your adult life it hasn't conflicted with your Christian faith. You say, I've not seen any tension. Only recently did I pick up that this is an issue for some Christians, that alien life poses a challenge to their faith. Well, it doesn't fit with their reading of a biblical worldview. Skeptics pick up on this and run with it. In the film Paul, a young woman loses her faith when encountering an alien. The film sees that as wholly rational. But it's all very silly and unhelpful. I'd respond that the God of the universe paints from an extravagant palette and is not limited by our insecurity. security. Thank you very much for getting in touch and for your kind words on the programme today. Glad it's helped you, and I hope this programme has helped you wherever you are listening today, whether it's this Saturday afternoon or via podcast. Don't forget that still to come on Premier Christian Radio in the Faith Explored section of programming, between 4 and 5 this afternoon, you can hear the profile interview. Today's guest is Eric the Eagle Ocheng, a talented young British boxer who talks to Marcus Jones about his life and faith. For now, though, I'm going to say goodbye and let you know what's coming up on Unbelievable next week.
You're unbelievable.
It's the second show where we're looking at this DVD set, The God Question, this time on mind and consciousness, asking whether there's evidence for God or a soul, or whether the human mind is simply a product of natural processes. Two exciting guests join me: Michael Roos, a philosopher of science who's an atheist agnostic, and Keith Ward, Christian philosopher of mind. That'll be a great discussion. Hope you can come back at the same time between 2:30 and 4 next week, or find us online at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. I'll see you then.